I was born into a Christian family. I had two really loving parents that knew the Lord and raised us really well in that way. My parents like rule was like, you go to church on Sundays, like if church is open you're there unless you're like sick. Like we were there every single week. Never really grew up missing any churches. Like I was involved in everything in church. And whenever I was really extremely close with my grandfather, and he was like my best friend, and like me and him would go on like little dates to Chick-fil-A every single Friday. He'd pick me up from pre-K and like we would go whenever I was like 4 years old. It was like the best thing ever. Like we were extremely close, and like coming from a family with 3 older sisters, like I never got that like special alone time. So I would continuously like be like, oh, like grandpa like knew that he was like my favorite. All my sisters knew it too, so like I got to like really be loved on by him. And whenever I was 5 years old, my grandfather got murdered. And so it really wrecked me. I was 5, so like I still remember it pretty well for being 5. People like don't expect that seeing me, like they don't think that anything terrible has happened in my life, but so he was murdered whenever I was 5. Actually, it might have been 6. And it was really hard to come back from that. I think that like I remember like coming down the stairs because like the night before my grandfather or my family had been like going through, like he had gone to the hospital, but my dad knew he was shot, but like none of the rest of our family knew. So like all of our cousins came over, and like my dad's best friend that we called like my Uncle Trey like came over and took care of us, and are like making him cards and all this stuff. And like I think someone explained it to me as like, oh, he had a boo-boo, like he's fine, like he's gonna be back, because he had gone to the hospital a few times like for like different medical things, so it like wasn't a big deal. And I remember waking up the next morning because like all my cousins had spent the night. It was like kind of like a fun night because it was like all the cousins together. We were really extremely close family.
Yeah.
And we wake up the next morning, and I walk down the stairs, and my dad has a Bible open, and I just like see him bawling, and I don't think I'd seen him cry at this point in my life. And I could see my mom in the kitchen, and she was like crying and trying to hold it together, but you could tell like she was trying like barely by a thread holding it together. And I had never seen my dad cry, and I just saw him bawling, and I was the first one to come down that morning, and he was like, just wait for your sisters, just wait for your sisters. And I was like, what is going on? Like I honestly had forgotten what had happened the night before, like that my grandfather went to the hospital. And so like my sisters came down, and my dad read me a verse, like our whole family a verse, and he was like, your grandfather's murdered last night. He was murdered for money. And that really wrecked me. I think my dad said it really well, like in the courtroom, like with the people that murdered him. He was like, now that my daughters grow up, they only see the evil in the world and the hatred and the sin in the world, and they can't see like past this, you know, and like that's gonna forever shape their minds. And so I think I honestly, it did shape my life for a really long time. I grew up with a lot of anxiety. I always am thinking about like what are the chances of like me getting hurt in this way, like me getting murdered or something like that. Grew up with a lot of anxiety, never really like felt at peace for it for a really long time, but didn't know how to like verbalize it. And so I continued to grow up. I think whenever like I sat there with like with my dad holding the Bible, he was like, I think I like came numb to the Bible at that point. I was like, a good God, and like my grandfather died, like I had a lot of hatred in my heart for him for a while. So I went around the motions for a really long time, and throughout growing up, like I was always at church, and like I was known as the girl that went to church, but don't know if I knew God, but I didn't want to like believe him.
Yeah.
So I continued to go through the motions for a really long time. My sister ended up dropping out of college for a year, and I was in middle school at the point, dropping out of college for a year and like living at home again. And so it was honestly like such a pivotal moment in my life. I was in middle school. I had like friends, but like not close friends. Like I didn't have like a friend group. And so I just like spent time. She taught me how to cook. She taught me how to bake. Like we just got extremely close because of like circumstances she couldn't handle. She was at home, and so like I just spent all my time with her. Like I'd go to school, and we'd come home, and we'd bake and cook and whatever together. So me and my sister got extremely close in that year, and like it was such a godsend of like, especially because I have 3 older sisters and she's the oldest, so it was like the chances of like me and her being close were not like good. I mean, she's 6 years older than me, so it was like honestly really impactful that like I got to like be a part of that, and I loved that year. I think that just like set the tone for the rest of our like life together. Like still now we're extremely close, like we're the closest of the sisters. And then I was like in high school, I was still like doing the motions, and I think I honestly really did believe in God, but I still had this back in my mind of like, how could a good God like let bad things happen? And I was in a small group with a bunch of different girls that like went to my high school, and there was a lot of drama and gossip and stuff like that happened, and so I decided I like had to step away from that small group, and I ended up joining a small group for a high school, like a public school nearby. I went to a private Christian school, but like I went to like the public school small group, and they ended up giving me like, I like became best friends with the girls in that small group, and it was really cool. Like we lived kind of in community. Like I think we lived for what we knew it was community. Like we read our Bibles together and stuff like that. We were really good about like talking about God, but like not necessarily like living for the Lord. And so like I grew up with those people. Like I went to a different high school, but I wasn't close with the people at my high school. And so yeah, just like went through the emotions of that for a really long time, and I think I really do think I knew God. Like I think he was a part of my life, but I don't think I was like fully like pledging my whole life to him. So I came to college freshman year, and I remember there was like this expectation I felt of like, I have to be able to like do this and like do all this, like I have all the freedom now. But I had this like morality that I was like holding on to, and some people like could call it like from the outside Christian like, but it was like honestly the morality of like, I think I'm better than these people, like I want to be better. And it wasn't like a conviction from God that I wasn't drinking and that I wasn't doing this. It was literally just like, I wanted to hold on to this because it made me better, or it like made me more moral. And so I held on to like a lot of things. I was like outside, very Christian, but I went to church in the mornings just because my parents like would check my location, and I went to church only for that reason, and like would leave before the first song was over because I didn't want to be seen, and I didn't want to have to like act like I was faking this Christian life anymore. And I think I like really tried to like get into like the friend groups. I got into a sorority I liked, and I loved my sorority. My sorority like was my whole identity for a really long time. And so I did like everything, and I had the friend group, and I had a lot of things. Still was pretty empty. At this time, my oldest sister was working on staff with the church I was going to. It's Christ Chapel College Ministry, and she was working on staff. And so I think my sister, like, I mean, she definitely did. She saw the difference. She was like, she knows that like I was just doing the motions and not actually like had a relationship with God. So she kept on like inviting me and like being like, Elizabeth, like let's go get lunch, like come on, like come like go to this Christ Chapel thing. And so I would go just like to please her, because like I wanted to hang out with my older sister, because we were still like talked all the time. And it's funny now to see it, like the people that like she would share about my testimony, she would share like prayer requests for me. She'd be like, hey, like will you pray for my little sister, like I really want her to come to know the Lord and like devote her whole life to him. Like those people are now some of my friends, and they're like, we were praying for you before we knew you. Which is really cool. It was just like all God, honestly. And so I like was doing that all freshman year, like kind of in one foot in one out. I didn't want the full like Christian life labeled. And I think I came to the end of freshman year, and I like had a chance to look back on my freshman year experience, and I was like, I've gotten the friend group, I got in the sorority I want, I have the reputation I want, like blah blah blah, and like there's something so empty about me. Like there is and I always say like it's a Jesus-sized hole in my heart. And so I think I just like had that Jesus-sized hole in my heart for so long, and I was like trying to fill it in, like, oh, if I got into this friend group, like I like will be good and like I'll be satisfied. But like that satisfaction is ultimately nothing from me or like humans or anything of like sinful nature. It's literally from God. And so I like looked back on my freshman year experience, and I was like, either I'm gonna like let go of my morality and like I'm gonna go as crazy as I want and I'm gonna do whatever, or I'm gonna fully invest in the Lord. because I was holding on to that morality of like, I'm better. And so I was like, maybe that would fulfill my heart, or like maybe there's like this thing like God that would fulfill my heart. And I ultimately ended up like spending time in the word, and I was like I want to pursue this. Like, I'm just gonna let my feet, like, lay all my burdens at his feet. And so I ended up doing that, and it was the best decision ever. I think coming in sophomore year, I had to reframe my brain a lot. I was really good, I think, like in middle school and high school, of like, I lived in community, but I wasn't necessarily like, I was good at talking about God, but not talking to God. Like, I would talk about God all the time, like whatever, like I knew the gospel backwards and forwards, but I wasn't good at like talking and having a relationship with him, which is ultimately the only way to salvation. So I like lived in my sorority house that year, and it was a really testing year of like, it was my first time like really devoting my life to the Lord, and I didn't live in community, so I had to like outseek that somewhere else. But also I just got to rest in the Lord, and like I had such a dependence on him that I'll never be able to forget. Like, my roommate wasn't a believer, and I love her so much, but she didn't live like that. She don't want to say that she's a believer, but she didn't live like it either. So we just like got to live together, and I got to like fully depend on the Lord of like, I don't know like what I'm gonna come home to, and I don't know like if I'm gonna have someone to go to formal with next week, and I don't know like all these things that like I had built up in my brain of like, they're my idols. Like, the Lord ripped them away from me, which was like really kind of him. At like first it was really hard, but I knew that those were idols. And I think that was like the first time of like my anxiety that I like faced for a really long time in high school. Just like always felt with anxiety and depression. Like, my anxiety was like wiped away from me, and I don't think that's the story for everyone. I think that that was just a really gift from God, but I was very anxiety prone from before God, and I think the Lord just like took that away from me of like, this is my gift, and like, you get to rest in me. So it was really kind. Yeah, it was really, really kind. And so yeah, I just rested in the Lord for a whole year. I would pray like outwardly, like, I need community, I need people to like be able to like live with, and like, I want to have people to hang out with on Thursday nights whenever everyone's going out. And that was like a prayer for a whole year. So I prayed that all sophomore year. I ended up meeting my best friends on a mission trip with my church, like end of sophomore year, but we didn't get close until like junior year. So like a whole year of praying for community, and like praying that the Lord would provide in that way, and like knowing the Lord would provide. But I also knew that there was a reason why I didn't have it now, because I was good at being dependent on community. So the Lord ultimately opened that door, and I like now live with I live in a duplex right under believers, and then like other believers that I'm really close with like on the door over. So the Lord like ultimately like provided so heavily there, and I think it's just been like such a cool journey to like rest in the Lord. And like, it was a prayer for a year, and I knew I could see God in it. I just didn't know where exactly he wanted me at the time. That's my testimony.